Hello and welcome to Always Bored Never Boring. I've been meaning to do some coverage of gameplay for Masters of the Universe Battleground for the longest time, but for one reason or another, I've just never got around to it. With Archon Studio getting a license extension to distribute the game in some territories outside of Europe, and also running a Gamefound campaign to expand the product line, I thought it was time to get a move on. However, when I sat down and started working on a quick video covering the basics of gameplay, it emphasised that this really is a game of two halves. There is the half you play on the battlefield, moving your beautiful miniatures over gorgeous terrain elements, playing cards and rolling dice. But before you get to that, there is the team building aspect, the part of the game where you select your characters, pick their equipment, and then choose your strategy. So in today's video, I am going to focus just on team building, as it does inform so much of what will subsequently happen on the tabletop. Battleground uses cards to organise your forces, divided into characters, equipment, fate and glory. And as of Wave 7, there are hundreds of cards available. I like this. I enjoy getting hands-on with cards, sorting them into stacks, visualising the possible combos as I flip through decks. I keep all my cards in this snazzy binder, which holds up to 900. I've filled about half of it so far, so I have plenty of space to play with. Every character and equipment card has a points cost associated with it, and for a standard game, you would pick a team that doesn't exceed 100 points in total. However, do note that the cards don't have points printed on them. All the points are available on the Archon website as a document that I save each time a new wave of products comes out. The thinking here is Archon can constantly rebalance the costs of the cards if they need to, without invalidating the physical cards you have purchased. It's not ideal, but it works, and Archon have hinted that at the end of the Gamefound campaign they are currently running, there will be a surprise regarding team building. I don't know what it is, but if I had to hazard a guess, it would be an army builder app or website with all the cards and points costs in it to help players organise their force selections. Now I have to say, it took a while for me to get my head around the point system for this game and how characters are balanced, because the margins are always so, marginal. For example, you might think, well, He-Man is going to be about 50 points, but that's not the case. He-Man is just 19 points, exactly the same points cost as Beastman and Whiplash, and just 3 points more than a character like Orko. You have to quickly realise that this is a game about balance and carefully constructed synergies. There is no one character who can dominate a game single-handedly, and often your team building comes down to tweaking just 1 or 2 points to optimise your force. But armed with this knowledge, we are almost ready to start picking a squad. As we do this, we just need to remember the winning conditions for the match ahead. Generally speaking, a contest lasts for 4 rounds or until one player has been tabled. Totally wiping out your opponent's force is an instant win, but failing that, the winner is determined by victory points. You will score 20 victory points for each objective token you seized during the game. Depending on the scenario and how many objectives are in play, it is often possible to score 60 victory points in this way. You will also score victory points from any side quests you completed from playing glory cards. You will have 5 glory cards, each of which may grant up to 30 victory points, so you could potentially generate 150 points this way. More on that later. Finally, you will score victory points equal to the total points cost of each enemy you knocked out, factoring in all their equipment. You can score up to 100 victory points this way, but of course if you table your opponent, you instantly win anyway. If one player has 20 more victory points than their opponent at the end of the 4th round of the game, they win. Otherwise, the game is a draw. So, how do you want to score your points? Do you want to go for claiming objectives and building a defensive force, or do you want to go out laser guns blazing to crush the enemy, points be damned? Maybe you want to focus on your team's strengths by selecting side quests that play into your character's abilities, or maybe you want to be a well-rounded force, picking up points from a variety of sources. Once you have a rough idea of what you want to do, it's time to pick a faction. The factions are Masters of the Universe, Evil Warriors, Evil Horde, the Great Rebellion, Eternia Heroes and Snake Men. Additionally, there are the Fighting Foemen, but those characters act as mercs that can be used in any other faction rather than being a faction in their own right. With a game like this, most people will probably want to play the faction containing their favourite characters, but each faction does have its own style of play to consider. The Masters of the Universe and the Evil Warriors are the most, I don't want to say generic as that suggests they're boring, they are the most accessible. As the first 2 factions, they are a little more straightforward and don't introduce any rules that bend or break the standard format of the game. They also have pre-constructed fate decks in the core box so you can get them up and running quickly without thinking too hard about deck construction. He-Man and his crew focus mainly on mobility and defensive strategies, gaining free movement and manipulating focus tokens and Overwatch tokens. Skeletor's team is more aggressive. They often gain benefits for taking wounds, they are good at dishing out and manipulating debuffs, and they can employ some strategies where they screw each other over for personal gain. The evil Horde are a horde. They rely on fielding a large number of disposable minions and can recycle fate cards from the discard pile to gain additional activations. The Great Rebellion are all about teamwork and manipulating buffs. They can also gain advantages by taking a thoughtful approach to situations, gaining bonuses for activating after their opponents. Each character in the Great Rebellion also has a special ultimate skill triggered by playing fate cards. Then we have the Snake Men, who are devious, making use of hidden movement, ambushes and area control abilities. And finally we have the Preternian heroes, who can soak damage and then draw strength from the damage they have received. They also have dinosaurs. For this video we're going to pick the Masters of the Universe. They are a good team for grabbing objectives on the battlefield. And naturally my first pick is He-Man. If he hasn't been turned to stone, given amnesia or locked in a cave behind laser bars, I don't know why you wouldn't include him. He's a good fighter, and his special ability, I Have the Power, ensures he usually packs a punch. Basically, every character is allowed to hold up to 5 mana tokens at any one time. These can be spent for active abilities, or they can be cashed in for rerolls during tests. 1 mana token allows you to reroll 1 dice. But I Have the Power allows you to reroll 2 dice for every mana spent, which means He-Man is going to have a lot more rerolls available. He can shrug off a lot more attacks, and he can generate a lot more hits when he socks someone in the mush. His main downside is that he will never willfully and selfishly take power or use his power. When you activate a character with a Fate or Glory card, that character would normally gain some mana, more on this later, but He-Man never gets the mana from those cards. Instead, he will gain a mana token when he is prepared to use his superhuman reflexes to leap into action. In game terms, he gets a mana token when he is given a focus token. This opens up a lot more opportunities to gain mana as opposed to relying on fate cards, but it means you have to build your team with He-Man in mind. Just like in the comics and the Filmation series, he relies on his friends for support, and if you treat him like a one-man army, he's going to get knocked out. Adding He-Man to your team costs 19 points, but that is for him unarmed. If we look at the back of He-Man's card, we can see that he has 6 item slots which can hold 1 melee weapon, 1 ranged weapon, 1 armor, 1 shield and 2 trinkets. With the exception of minions, all characters are allocated a piece of equipment that only they can use. It's called basic equipment in the game, but in most cases it's an iconic weapon or accessory. You don't have to take these items, but if you do, you have to pay the price in points. And in fairness, I almost always take them. They are all designed to work well with their associated characters, and the characters feel slightly incomplete without them. He-Man's basic equipment is the Sword of Power. It costs 3 points, and at first it doesn't seem anything special, until you realise it has been designed with He-Man in mind. Before attacking with it, you can spend up to 3 mana to gain 1 dice on the attack for each mana spent. Bearing in mind He-Man's strength is 5, that means he could use 3 mana to roll 8 dice for a single attack. And if he has 2 more mana in reserve, he can re-roll up to 4 of those dice. No other character can hit anywhere near that hard. So the aim of the game with He-Man is making sure you can always keep him topped up with mana. There is equipment that can help with that, but I tend to find it's easier to pick all the characters for your team first and then go back to spend points on equipment after. If you are fielding He-Man, Man at Arms is a really useful teammate. He is the most dangerous man in Eternia after all. He costs 18 points and he's worth every penny. His passive ability, Always Vigilant, can grant him a free Overwatch token. An Overwatch token can allow you to interrupt your opponent's turn, intercepting them and disrupting their plans. His second ability, Master Tactician, can generate mana for the next character on his team that activates. Naturally, you are going to set your turns up so he can dump those free mana tokens on He-Man as much as possible. His basic weapon is the Awesome Arm Cannon. It costs 2 points, taking Man at Arms up to 20 points total, but it gives your team some ranged firepower and it has some powerful benefits. It doesn't take up a ranged weapon slot, so Man at Arms can still take 6 other pieces of equipment, including another gun, and also it costs 1 action less than normal to use. so Man-at-Arms can make more efficient use of his actions and perhaps even fire multiple times per turn. Keeping in mind we want to be able to score objectives and hold defensive positions while keeping He-Man buffed, we're going to add Stratos next for 17 points. He can spend mana to fly, which means he can cover a lot of ground by ignoring terrain and elevation rules. He also has an ability that will allow him to test power to give any activated ally on the battlefield an Overwatch or Focus token. Of course, if he gives a Focus token to He-Man, He-Man also gets a mana token. Stratos is armed with the Brutal Flamethrower, which does splash damage and nerfs all defense rolls, so damage is only negated on the roll of a 6. I always thought it was a bit of a steal at 2 points. That takes us up to 61 points. This is the stage where you start thinking, do I want 2 more characters or 1 more character and some extra equipment? Let's add Teela because it's Teela. She only costs 16 points. Once per turn, when she interrupts an opponent, she can make a free 2-hex move in any direction that cannot be interrupted. This makes it possible to make deadly hit-and-run attacks or else escape from enemies that charge into combat with her. Her Warrior Goddess ability lets allies within 8 inches reroll up to 2 dice when they make a skill test. The wording here is important. There are 3 types of tests in the game. Attack tests, when you use a melee, ranged or magic attack. Defense tests, when you defend against any attack or skill. And skill tests, when you perform a skill such as Man-at-Arms Master Tactician. By adding Teela, we are improving the chances of Man-at-Arms and Stratos succeeding in the skill rolls that will generate mana for He-Man. Teela's basic equipment is Teela's Sword, which costs 2 points. It grants her an extra attack dice, and if she generates 2 or more successes, she gets another free 2-hex move that cannot be interrupted. This really makes her deadly and fast. It also makes her one of my favourite characters. At this stage we have spent 79 points. We could squeeze in 1 more hero. I would love to finish the team with Orko to add in some magic, but it would cost 17 points to add him with his Cosmic Storm spell, and if I do that, I only have 4 points left for equipment, and I really need some equipment. For a start, neither Man-at-Arms nor Stratos has a melee weapon. They can still make a melee attack with their fists, but I need them to be able to handle themselves properly. So for Man-at-Arms, I'm going to give him a mace. It's 3 points, but it's worth it because it boosts his defense while he has a focus token, and it allows him to push targets, making it easier for him to claim objectives on the board. For Stratos, I need to be careful. He is squishy with only 4 wounds and a toughness of 2. If I give him a really powerful weapon, it's a lot more potential victory points for my opponent if he gets knocked out. Also, I really don't want him in the thick of the fighting. This weapon is only supposed to be for if he gets caught, so an expensive item is going to be a waste of points. Having said that, most melee weapons are expensive anyway, so unless I want him to stay fighting with his bare hands, I'm going to have to pay. Let's give him the Staff of Avion. It's obviously a good thematic choice, but it's also just a good choice. It's 3 points, but it lets him roll up to 6 attack dice when he uses a focus token while attacking, and it gives him the chance of inflicting 2 wounds in close combat. We are down to our last 15 points, and I've got a good idea of what to do with them. He-Man can take a shield, so we are going to pay 2 points to give him the Steel Shield. If he faces a frontal attack, he instantly gains a focus token, which of course will then also grant him a mana token. I am planning to keep He-Man in the thick of the action, so I want to give him some armour too. Something nice and boring, the Battle Harness. It costs 3 points and gives He-Man +1 toughness. There are other characters on the team that would probably benefit from this more, both Stratos and Teela are toughness 2, but they should both be able to avoid a lot of danger, and as you are only allowed 1 of each piece of equipment on your team, this goes to He-Man. The last thing I want He-Man to have is the Grey Skull Ring. It's a trinket that will grant him, yes, a focus token if he gets at least 3 successes when he attacks. That's another 2 points well spent. I added 7 points to He-Man's total here, but he is now stronger and better able to generate mana tokens at a consistent rate, even if his friends let him down. Teela needs something too. One of her abilities only triggers during interruptions, and a good way to get interruptions is to have an Overwatch token, so I'm going to spend 2 points on the Wheel of Infinity, which will grant her an Overwatch token in turns when she doesn't attack. And to really make sure she does good work on those interruptions, I'm going to give her the Gem of Tamage. That will give her 1 extra attack dice while interrupting for 2 points. My final 4 points are going to Man-at-Arms. I'm going to buy him a nice helm for 2 points. That will grant him a focus token at the end of any interruptions he makes, so that pairs well with his ability to go on Overwatch and his mace. Then I will give him Ambrosia for 2 points. This is a disposable item, and I do love disposable items. Always have. There is something about having a one-shot power and trying to figure out exactly when to use it that I really enjoy. The Ambrosia simply gives him an extra action, so when I need to pull off a big turn, I have that in hand. And that is our team. He-Man with the Sword of Power, Steel Shield, Battle Harness and Grey Skull Ring for 29 points. Man-at-Arms with the Arm Cannon, Mace, Helm and Ambrosia for 27 points. Teela with Teela's Sword, the Wheel of Infinity and the Gem of Tamage for 22 points, and Stratos with the Flamethrower and Staff of Avion for 22 points. Grand total, exactly 100 points. I call this build, I have all the power. It's very much designed around He-Man and making sure he can punch as hard and as often as possible. It also leans heavily into getting into position and setting up Overwatch to react to whatever the enemy are doing. I'm not going to say it's a perfect build, but it is a build, and it's fun. Is it missing anything? Sure. I don't have any magic, and I don't have any ways to generate buffs on my characters. It's all about focus, mana, and Overwatch. Also, I don't have any disposable units. Any knockouts in this team will be devastating, and will also grant my opponent a lot of points. You could mitigate that by dropping 9 points of equipment and adding in a Palace Guard soldier, for example. But we aren't done yet. Once you have your team, you need to create a deck of exactly 20 Fate cards. As mentioned before, a game of Battleground normally lasts 4 rounds, and at the start of each round you draw 5 Fate cards into your hand. There are ways to get more, but it's 5 as standard. You will use these cards to activate characters. Each turn you and your opponent pick a Fate card, or a Glory card, and place it face down on the table. Then you flip them and compare the initiative number in the top left corner. Highest number activates first. When it is your turn to activate, you select a character who hasn't already activated this turn, and you give them the number of action points and mana tokens specified on your card. Although remember, He-Man never gains mana tokens from cards in this manner. You then get one of the bonuses from the bottom part of the card. This will either be 1 extra mana token, 1 extra action, or a special ability. This card, for example, lets you reroll an extra dice for each mana token you spend. Yes, that means He-Man will be rerolling 3 dice for each mana token he spends. Yes, He-Man hits really hard. And generally speaking, cards with a low initiative have better abilities on them. So when you are building your deck of Fate cards, there's a lot to think about. Do you pick low initiative cards for stronger abilities? Higher initiative cards so you will usually act first in a round? Or do you go for a good balance? And what kind of abilities do you want to take? Ones that key into how your heroes play, or ones that make up for some kind of deficiency in your team? There are also some cards that are geared towards specific characters. For example, this card from the She-Ra expansion will grant She-Ra the use of her ultimate skill. You can still use the card to activate any hero, but only She-Ra can use that skill. So generally, you wouldn't want this card in your deck for any other faction, even though there's nothing stopping you from taking it. It all seems quite daunting at first, but there are pre-constructed Fate decks in the core set. This symbol in the lower right corner means this card is part of a pre-constructed deck. When you are building your own decks, you just ignore these symbols. Also notice that in the lower left there is another faction symbol. That's because the core set contains 2 full sets of identical cards. It is a good idea to keep the 2 sets separate, as you are not allowed any duplicate cards in your Fate deck. My recommendation is to start out with the pre-built decks. They are well rounded without being too flashy, and they will teach you how the game works. Then you can gradually start swapping out cards you aren't keen on for ones that work better with your preferred strategy. The final thing to do is select Glory cards. Glory cards are more powerful Fate cards that you keep in your hand from the very start of the game. Whenever you would play a Fate card to activate a character, you are allowed to play one of your Glory cards instead. And you can see they still have an initiative value, action points and mana points. However, the lower part of the card will either grant you 1 additional action point or the chance to score some bonus victory points. For example, if you use this card to activate He-Man and you select the side quest, and then He-Man knocks Skeletor on his bony ass, you would score 20 bonus victory points. Originally, you were supposed to create a deck of 9 Glory cards, but apparently this has now been reduced to 5. And when it comes to selecting Glory cards, it's very much the same process as Fate cards. You want to balance initiative, action points, mana and side quests that key into your team's playstyle. There's no point including a Glory card that will grant you victory points for knocking out someone with magic if you don't have a spellcaster on your team. It should be noted that in the core game you get 2 sets of 9 glory cards, effectively 2 pre-constructed decks. However, now that you only pick 5 cards, you will have to make some decisions for yourself. Note that 2 glory cards in each set have a faction symbol on them. This is to mark them for use in a tutorial game from the rules book, and it doesn't mean those cards can only be used by those factions. However, if you are playing with the Masters of the Universe or the Evil Warriors, I recommend taking the 2 glory cards with your faction symbol and then picking any other 3 cards you like the look of, keeping in mind the more difficult a side quest is, the more points you will get for it. As with your Fate deck, duplicates are not allowed. And that is just about it. Phew, it's a lot to think about, but it is really good fun. Making the right choices at this point will determine how well your team fares in battle, and part of the fun is building a team, testing it, then refining it, then throwing it away and coming up with a new plan. I'm sorry this video was quite long and quite technical. Hopefully it wasn't also quite boring, and hopefully it has given some idea of the decision processes involved in creating a team of heroes or villains for Masters of the Universe Battleground. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below, because that is it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really like the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so, and hopefully I'll see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.